Welcome to Session 7, Clean Fighting. A core issue in discipleship in the new family of Jesus is learning how to resolve conflict maturely. Many people want to start with this skill, clean fighting. They want relief from the relational pain and tensions they're living with as quickly as possible. And we get that. But for this reason, it's important for us to give you realistic expectations around this skill. For one thing, you have to understand conflict happens on a spectrum of who takes out the garbage to a church split. In this session, we want you to think of this as a beginner conflict resolution tool. So we are not trying to deal with large, long-standing conflicts. What's also important to realize is that clean fighting builds on all the previous 7 skills we have worked on in this course. The CTR, stop mind reading, clarify expectations, genogram, explore the iceberg, incarnational listening, and the ladder of integrity. In order to be good at conflict resolution, you have to be good at knowing what's going on inside of you and be able to speak that respectfully, honestly, clearly, and in a timely fashion. You need to be aware of any assumptions you may be making or invalid expectations you have. You need to be a really good listener who is able to enter another person's world and incarnationally listen. And you have to be able to get at your values, as we talked about in the last session in the ladder of integrity. So let me ask you, how good are you at the other skills? It will be important that you continue to practice and get comfortable using them. So again, I implore you, practice, practice, practice. Now notice in your workbook, the purpose of this clean fighting tool is to resolve conflict as emotionally mature adults by eliminating dirty fighting and taking responsibility for an issue.
We each come from families of origin where we learned how to do conflict a certain way. For example, perhaps your mother was a yeller or a screamer, like mine, and your father was an appeaser who said little until he would reach a point where he would explode in anger, again, like my dad. Maybe you saw relationships in your family get ruptured or broken, but never repaired. That's all I knew. How many of you had caretakers or parents that modeled for you and taught you how to deal with conflict in a mature, healthy way? In our experience, few people have. In the church, we misinterpret Jesus' words in Matthew 5:9, where he says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God." We think peacemaking is avoiding conflict at all costs, so nobody gets upset. We mistakenly think it means we are to be nice. We don't want to rock the boat, so we say nothing and end up in what can be called a false peace. Everything looks nice and good above the surface, but actually there's tension, resentment, and anger very often underneath. But Jesus models for us true peacemaking. He didn't ignore tensions or differences. In fact, if you look closely, conflict was part of Jesus' life and ministry. He overturned the tables in the temple. He had difficult conversations with the religious leaders. He confronted the 12 disciples multiple times. He was not afraid to speak truth and disagree with people. Jesus disrupted false peace in order to bring true peace. In doing so, he shows us that true kingdom peace will never come by pretending that what is wrong is right, or by pretending that there is not tension when there is. In other words, true peacemakers love God and others enough to disrupt false peace. For this reason, learning to have a clean fight is a core discipleship issue for all of us. But it's important that we begin by looking first at ways that we do dirty fighting. So turn now in your workbooks and follow the instructions.
Dude, look at this, man. It's such a mess.
Whoa.
Has anyone ever told you you're a slob? Look at this. I come home from work after a long day. All I want is to make my dinner and clean up, but there's this mess that I have to clean up every single time. I've talked to you about this time and time again.
What's your problem, dude?
It's getting on my nerves, okay? You need to fix this. I'm not your personal cleaning service, okay?
Dude, I don't know what's your issue. Like, you've never said anything about this before. How am I supposed to know what
have
bothers
said
you?
it. You're not listening. You know what? Just
My last roommate was totally fine. We were good.
no. Just get to work, man. I'll clean it up like I always do.
Fine. I will just go then.
Sadly, the way people resolve conflicts in the church is not very different from the way conflicts are resolved outside the church. In fact, it's possible to be a Christian for 5 or 10 or 30 or 40 years and still be doing conflict the same way we did it as a 12-year-old in our family of origin. If we did a genogram of our families and looked only about how conflict was dealt with, we would probably see negative generational patterns or emotionally immature ways of doing conflict that goes back generations. So make no mistake about the significance of how much is at stake when we talk about learning this skill of clean fighting.
A clean fight in reality is not a fight, but a negotiation between two people for the sake of the relationship. The person asking for the clean fight recognizes they are the one with the issue. They care enough to take responsibility for something important to them rather than projecting blame on the other. The person listening to the issue, they care enough to consider what is important to someone they care about. They are willing to negotiate. So for example, I did a clean fight with Pete about his talking on the cell phone when he walks in the house at the end of the day. It was upsetting to me. Now, if he was married to someone else, it might not bother them at all, but it bothered me. So it was my issue, not Pete's.
Now we're going to show you the same roommates from a few minutes ago. This time they're going to be modeling the process of a clean fight for us. So follow along in your workbook as they go through the 8 steps of a clean fight.
Hey, Aaron. Hey, man. I was wondering, there's a recurring issue that has come up in my mind, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to do a clean fight with me like we've learned about in the Emotionally Healthy Relationships course.
Sure, yeah.
Thanks, man. Actually prepared some thoughts here. So, I notice you leave dirty dishes in the sink and used cooking pots and pans on the stove for 2 to 3 days after you use them.
So you've been noticing me leaving dirty dishes and pots on the sink after I've used them?
Yeah. I value being able to relax when I get home from work.
Do you value being able to relax from when you get home from work?
Mm-hmm. And that means being able to cook and clean up my dinner easily.
And that means being able to cook and clean up your dinner easily.
Mm-hmm. Just so there's time for relaxing for the rest of the evening.
So you have time to relax.
Mm-hmm. Especially because I like to read and watch shows at night.
Right. You like to read and watch shows at night.
Mm-hmm. So when I walk in the apartment at the end of a long workday and I see your dirty dishes in the sink and dirty pots and pans on the stove, I feel depressed.
You feel depressed when you see my dirty dishes and pots on the stove.
Mm-hmm. Because it really impacts me and eats away at the precious little time I have in the evenings.
It takes away the time that you have to relax. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Now I have to spend time cleaning the sink out and cleaning the pots or pans for my use before I prepare a meal.
You take the time that you'd rather be relaxing to have to clean up the pots before you can prepare your meal.
Yeah. So, I'd like to ask that you wash your dishes and any pot or pan you've used before I get home from work.
Okay, so you want me to clean my pots and dishes and any pans I've used before you get home from work?
Yeah, just so I can easily prepare and clean up for my own evening dinner.
So you can prepare and clean up for your own evening dinner?
Yeah.
Okay. See, my former roommate and I were pretty similar in that we left dishes and stuff to pile up for a couple days, so it was never really an issue. But I'm sorry, man. I didn't realize how much it impacted you, and I really do appreciate you as a roommate, and I don't ever want to make you feel taken for granted. Listen, right now, I've been having a really hard time to even find enough time to sleep with my new hospital job, and then to cook, eat, and then to clean everything up before I have to run out of the house with this crazy schedule, especially since we don't have a dishwasher. If I don't have time to wash my dishes and my pots, what if I make sure to set them aside and to keep the stove and the sink clear for you so you can use it, and I'll make sure that I do not leave those pots and dirty dishes there for, let's say, more than 2 days.
Okay.
Because, I do want to be a considerate roommate to you, even with my crazy schedule.
Okay. Wow, well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that and for apologizing. I really appreciate what you shared and the solution that you offered. I'd like to add just one thing that I would love to request to change from what you proposed.
Sure.
So Wednesdays in particular are really stressful days for me. Those are days when it's really hard for me to come home, and even if something was on the side and it was still messy, I think it would really cause me some stress. So one of the things that I wanted to request is I totally love your suggestion and proposal, but would you be willing on Wednesdays in particular to clean it up completely, to be mindful of cleaning up completely, or you order takeout so you don't have dirty dishes and you can just throw it away? Would that be something you're willing to do? Because Wednesdays are really stressful for me.
Yeah. I mean, I can definitely do that. Wednesdays works great for that, actually.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Okay, well, why don't we do this? Can we write up an agreement, and then we can test this arrangement out for the next 2 weeks, and then we can evaluate how it goes.
Sounds good to me. Sounds
Awesome,
like a plan.
Thank you.
Cool, yeah.
Thanks.
You just saw clean fighting modeled. Now let me walk you slowly through the steps that are in your workbook. Notice the first thing the speaker did was to ask permission to do a clean fight. When the other person says yes, then the speaker begins. So 1, the speaker states the problem with, "I notice." 2, you state why it's important to you. "I value," you finish that sentence. Thirdly, fill in the following sentence. "When you," "I feel." 4, you'll state clearly, respectfully, and specifically your request. Specifically means to include details such as time and dates. The listener, at this point, responds. Number 5, the listener considers the request. In a few sentences, briefly share your feelings and perspective on it. Then 6, as the listener, are you willing to do all of it, part of it, or none of it? And then the speaker responds. The speaker then, number 7, agrees with the request, modifies the request, or offers an alternative. If you need to go back and forth more than 3 times, you need a mature third party to help you with this process. Then number 8, together, you write your agreement and make a plan to go over it in 2 to 4 weeks. Now it's your turn to practice. So follow the instructions for the clean fight in your workbook. Most of us believe conflict is a sign of something going wrong, but the reverse is often true. It may actually indicate that something is going right. That's because conflict is normal, important, and necessary if relationships are going to flourish and mature over time. So let me close with a few thoughts. First, in a very real sense, God invites all of us to learn a new way in this new family of Jesus, how to negotiate conflicts and differences. That is, how to have a clean fight. This radically different way of doing relationships is one of the greatest gifts we as local churches and communities give to the world around us. Secondly, conflicts quite often can be places of revelation about God. You will notice that in this week's reading from the Emotionally Healthy Relationships Day by Day devotional has a story of Jacob and his long-standing cutoff with his brother Esau. As Jacob prepares to resolve the conflict with his brother, he's filled with fear and anxiety. Yet God meets him in an extraordinary way, and Jacob is transformed in the process. In the same way as you do this courageous work of learning to have a clean, not a dirty fight, you too can expect God to meet you in new ways and mold you even more into the image of his son, Jesus. Thirdly, we each need to learn and become aware of how our triggers in the present have roots in our past. That is, our genograms, especially as it relates to conflict. In fact, research shows that 96% of arguments are determined in the first 3 minutes. Let me say that again. 96% of arguments are determined in the first 3 minutes. So you want to be really careful how you start the conversation. Start softly, be mindful of your tone, your facial expressions, and your body language. And if you find yourself triggered and wanting to run out of the room, be sure to ask for a timeout. Or if you started out in the wrong tone and find the conversation spiraling downward, you can simply say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I didn't start out right. Can we start again?" And finally, remember, not every conflict gets resolved this side of heaven. In those cases, it involves forgiveness and lots of letting go. Now, you may have inadvertently found yourself in a fight that's complex and requires significant skill to unpack and dissect. When that happens, you will want to speak to a mature mentor, a pastor, or a professional counselor. These are significant moments for our discipleship and maturing in Christ. I trust you can now increasingly see how much these skills have a lot to do with a growing spirituality. So let me encourage you to slow down, to integrate silence, stillness, and scripture into your life. Use the EH Relationships Day by Day devotional. This week's scriptures and the devotionals revolve around the skill of clean fighting. So utilize that time to be with Jesus. Open your heart to new things God might be seeking to say to you, and surrender your will to his. Now this week, your assignment is to practice this clean fighting skill. And don't be afraid. God will be with you, just as he was with Jacob.